Welcome back. You're watching Inside Story. We're talking about Iran-US relations, and we're joined once again by our guests in Doha, Dubai. And let's go first of all to London, talk to Professor Abbas Adalat from the Campaign Against Sanctions and Military Intervention in Iran. If Iran is able to help the United States in calming some of the violence in Iraq, it will look for some kind of payback. What sort of payback do you think Tehran will want?
I think the major concession, if you can call it concession, is that there should be security guarantees for Iran. Namely, the US should change radically its strategy for regime change in Iran, give up the option of military intervention, give up the covert operations which have been recently approved by President Bush for CIA to carry out. This is after the disbanding of the Iran-Syria policy group that you just mentioned. After that, President Bush, according to ABC and according to Daily Telegraph yesterday here in London, has instructed the CIA to carry out covert operations to destabilize the Islamic Republic and pave the way for its overthrow. Therefore, Iran would like, obviously, because all these measures are against international law, against the UN Charter, and Iran as a sovereign nation would like its sovereignty to be recognized by the US, and all these threats and all these operations to overthrow it, to seize. And also, Iran wants its legitimate rights under NPT to be able to enrich uranium for a fuel cycle for generation of electricity, which is its legitimate right under NPT.
All right, let's do a little bit of Iran-US negotiating here on this program. Michael Peltier from the State Department. You've heard the shopping list. How much are you going to buy?
Well, I'm not a negotiator, and those sorts of decisions or negotiations, if there were ever to be any, would be made by people in Washington. But I just want to say that I think, we need to look at the basis of your question just now, which is it's within the Iranian government and the Iranian people's interest to have stability and security in Iraq. The Iranian government itself has said that. And I think that was what was repeated today. And what we're all waiting for is to see that applied on the ground in terms of the Iranian government's policies. The United States people, the United States government have, the greatest respect for the people of Iran, their culture and their history. And we would hope to be able to work with them to realize some of their desires. Unfortunately, the policies that are currently in effect make that difficult or impossible. And we're looking forward to the day when the realities on the ground in terms of Iranian support for militias or Iranian transmitting explosive devices, etc., technologies, etc., to Iraq, until those realities change so that the realities can change.
Ahmad Hamzawi from the Carnegie Endowment, acting as our honest broker here. When you hear the cases put by both the United States and Iran in our discussion, how far apart do you think the sides are?
Well, they are far apart out of two reasons. One, in fact, both of the two sides use, in fact, in a negative way, a moralizing rhetoric. I mean, Iran speaks about security needs and regional needs and recognition by the U.S. of the Islamic Republic. And the U.S. on the other side speaks about an Iranian interest in stabilizing Iraq, which is true, but it is legitimate as well for Iran to play it out as a card. So I guess both sides really need to move beyond the moralizing and accusing rhetoric, which they have been using over the last years, and which has been dominant in the relationship between the two countries since 1979. But what's really missing on the American side is a conceptualization of a basket of incentives. What is the US, what is the administration willing to offer Iran in return for an Iranian help in stabilizing conditions in Iraq? Because this help will not be given for no price. I mean, there is a price to be paid, and the US needs to come up with a basket of incentives. Is it primarily related to regional conditions, a recognition of Iran's role in the region, maybe allies of Iran, Hezbollah, other resistance movements being given a different role, or is it primarily related to international issues and the issue of nuclear technology and UN resolutions at the heart of them? So the US really needs to come up with an idea of what kind of incentives should be offered, and Iran on the other side needs to prove, at least in in a systematic and in a real way, that it can really act upon its rhetoric, upon its commitment to stabilizing Iraq. Iran hasn't done so well in terms of stabilizing Iraq. We still lack stability, and we still lack a credible political process. And Iran has good connections to move the political process in a real direction in terms of national reconciliation.
Professor Adalat in London from the Campaign Against Sanctions and Military Action in Iran. In a sense, would it not be better to now sort of try and join in as much discussion as possible with this current administration, while it seems to be going a little softer than it was in the past? Because working alongside that, there's another group confronting the Iranian threat, the way forward, where people are advocating military action. Isn't now the time to talk to the United States to avoid that?
Of course. I mean, in 2003, Iran offered a major overture to the U.S., offering even to, in effect, recognize the state of Israel, to use its influence to make Hezbollah and Hamas into political parties, and to give complete assurance in transparency of its nuclear program. That offer was completely dismissed, and the Swiss government was reprimanded for passing on this overture, this offer to the US. So Iran has always been interested for negotiations. The issue here is that, unlike what your previous guest respectfully said, there is no symmetry here. To think that there is a symmetry here between Iran and US is a major illusion. Iran has not threatened or invaded any countries for 250 years. Under the Islamic Republic, Iran has only been the victim of a US Western-backed invasion of Iran by Saddam Hussein. Iran has never, even when Taliban regime murdered 9 Iranian diplomats in Mazar Sharif, Iran did not take any retaliatory action against Taliban. Iran is not a threat to anyone in the Middle East, and its track record shows that.
Okay, but notwithstanding what you say, the United States president has branded Iran part of the axis of evil. And Michael Peltier from the State Department, it's described Iran as a central banker for terrorism, and it's always said that it would never negotiate with states that sponsor terrorism. So how do you marry that with the fact that you might be starting to talk more openly with Iran?
I think you have to realize that, I mean, today's talks and the talks that have happened at Sharm, the Neighbors Conference in Sharm, etc., are very much focused on Iraq and the stabilization and security of Iraq. That is the focus of the talks, and that is why these talks are moving forward. That channel has been open and available for a while. It's finally being used now, and we hope it will have some effect for the good of the Iraqi people and for the good of the people of the region. I mean, I think it's funny that people keep talking about some sort of payoff for Iran to do something that's in Iran's best interest according to the Iranian government itself. If it's in Iran's best interest, then Iran should do it.
Dr. Amar Hamzawi, giving us the middle ground on this one. Do you think talks will continue, or will we see military action?
No, I guess the potentiality of a military action against Iran has become less and less over the last few months, and this is related to domestic conditions in the U.S. as well as regional conditions. Of course, part of the radicalizing trajectory about which I talked earlier is that the U.S. is still sending warships to the Gulf, but this is really sort of the confrontation game which is going on. But a military action is becoming less and less viable and less potential. What needs to be addressed is whether we are approaching a process, whether this today was a beginning of a process of bilateral negotiations, which I believe is going to be, but it is still ambivalent and ambiguous. It really depends on actions on the ground, not only on the Iranian side, on the American side as well. And one point with regard to your previous, or your guest from London, I guess what he said was really an ultimate proof of the moralizing rhetoric, which Iran and the official rhetoric
I'm
in
sorry,
Iran.
I'm going to have to stop you. My fault for expecting a short answer from an academic. It's been a fascinating discussion. Thanks very much indeed to our 3 guests. Thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We've been talking about Iranian-US relations. Email us, insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye.